Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you want to find out more about what we do or sign up, you can go to officehours.global. The first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production, and sometimes other things, geeky things. Second hour is about something we'd like to spend a little more time on. Today, we're going to talk about Office Hours 2.0. Andy Carluccio is going to join us and talk about progress. We're going to talk about what's working, what's not working, what we're working on, all those things in the second hour. Friday, we have Parsec. They're going to be joining us and talking about their product and answering your questions. And then on Saturday is the long day. We have education at 8. Now, we don't broadcast that. You have to be in Zoom, so make sure to sign up, and then you'll get the invite, and then you'll do the thing. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll be back on air talking, cooking with Damayanti Gajar, and we're pretty excited about that. And then at 12:30, we will be going back to Belfast with the Belfast method and taking over the theater, not the bar, but the theater. And we'll have an in-room audience, a band. It's going to be great. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes this morning from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. He says, I use NDI for sports production, thinking of migrating to a Constellation. What are the best NDI to SDI decoders?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's a couple different manufacturers. I really like the Mage wells, but if you're going to be doing a lot of these, you probably want to clean it up. You can get them from Bird Dog. That's another one that is super popular in the market. But the way to clean it up is to get something like some of the guys that have truck type equipment would use a rack mount, and this is a KiloView rack mount where you can put a couple of them side by side. So if you're going to be making a whole transition, I'd probably be looking at these guys just to keep your wiring nice and clean and keep everything pretty.
And KiloView makes both the converter as well as the rack?
Yeah, that's correct. And you can get them in a couple different models. This is the 3 RU rack mount, and they do have a 1 RU. And you want to be careful if you're buying these to make sure that you get the right ones too. There's 12G, there's 3G, so just make sure that you're buying for the future as well. If you plan on going to 4K eventually, you might want to shop early and get your stuff now. But here's what the 1 RU rack mount chassis looks like. So still pretty clean. This will do 4 side by side. The other one, I don't remember how big the other one would get, but you can get an idea as to what they look like. And just be careful that you're not buying things that you don't need. Like this one's $1,000, but it also does SRT. So you want to be careful that you're not buying stuff that has a bunch of features that you don't need, because a basic one should cost less than $500. And I mean, you could even get an Apple TV to do this if you wanted to by using Sienna. That's one of the cheapest ways to do this for folks that just want a really basic way. And that license you can install on as many Apple TVs as you want. So that's a super cheap way, but that's not SDI, that'd be HDMI.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Guy mentioned KiloView. I should point out that they are the OEM manufacturer for Nutex products that come in the same case and what have you. But should we just be a little cheeky and refer back to yesterday's second hour and the product that was demonstrated then? Would that be a suitable solution for this question?
It would be. I don't know what the price point is there, and I don't know. It probably could. It could very well add up to a very similar price point at that point. And I believe that the bridge NDI, I think it's 16 IO is what it provides for. So that's a lot of back and forth. Absolutely. You go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'll agree with Guy on the Magewell. One nice feature that it has is a USB input. You can then map keyboard shortcuts, effectively turning that thing into a mini router of sorts.
Interesting. Very cool. So it's routing different NDI signals through the SDI.
Yep.
That's really interesting. Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada is up next, and he says, how do you see Apple's new self-repair option announced this week? Power to the right to repair movement, or getting ahead of the legislation that's probably in the works?
I go ahead, Jason.
It's inevitably both, and I'd say it's a huge step in the right direction. The problem, of course, and I hate to rain on everyone's parade, but the problem, of course, is self-repair always means that other parties can get access to tools that can in turn mess around with and make theft easier. That said, I still think it's a great idea.
Go ahead, Rupert.
It's an interesting discussion across the board, but I think it's different if you're thinking about consumers versus business or enterprise or production. In some of those circles, what you don't want the right to repair. You want the right to call somebody and for them to fix it. Apple Care, whatever. You don't want to get involved in some of those things.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So Apple is just giving you, will be giving you a key, but is it a key to the house or is it a key to the back door to the garage? That doesn't go into the house at all. And that's where it's coming in. We don't know how Apple Care is going to be affected from it. From everything that I've read so far, you still have to go to a certified Apple dealer to get the parts from. And you have to return the parts so you can get money back. And I think you have to bring it back to them to check it, but that hasn't been said just yet because we don't know how that's going to affect on the 2-year warranty of your phone. And of course, if you've never taken apart a phone or a tablet before, or a computer for that matter, it's going to be a very big process because you still have to deal with the glue, you still have to deal with the glass breaking and all that other stuff. And that's pretty much it.
Good. Bill?
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of iFixit, and I've done a dozen or so repairs on my own. But at this point, I don't think I'm ever going to get into system on a chip level repair. I think these things are getting so complex that the idea that I'm going to try to get in there and futz with my own stuff is getting more and more diminished as manufacturing gets more and more sophisticated. Just how I feel about it, leaving it to the professionals.
I don't think that it has to do with giving consumers, I've been thinking about this a lot, is that I don't think it has anything to do with giving consumers really the tools to fix their own phone. It's giving people who are precocious the ability to fix their friends' phones and their schoolmates' phones and everything else. And I think that generally when you see a company fight back a lot and then suddenly they shift gears, it's usually not like they change what they were doing. I believe what they're doing is flooding the market. So they're flooding the unauthorized fix-it process with lots of people. So by making these tools suddenly available to everyone, it means that if you're unauthorized, you're not any different than some kid in a dorm room that's willing to fix them for pizza money. So the thing is it makes it, I think that it's going to make it, it's really good for consumers. We will have other options. It's good for Apple because regardless of whether this is a perfect solution or not, it's going to be so hard for a regulator or Congress or anything else to have any more conversations about Apple because they're saying, hey, we're selling the parts to individuals. I mean, it's made such a big jump. It just makes the whole thing cloudy. And that's not what politicians like. so they're not going to, they probably won't wade into that cloud anymore. But I think that what it does do for unauthorized dealers is probably the end of half of them. Within 3 years, half of the unauthorized dealers will be gone. I mean, authorized fix-it places will be gone because they're competing with individuals. And again, if I was in high school, I would have stopped doing shoveling. Working on yards and shoveling snow if I knew that I could fix, people's screens. That was much more my my speed. And so you're going to be competing with, 1,000 teenagers per city. So if you're not authorized, you're not going to be, I think it's going to be very hard to survive in this area. So Apple gets what it wants over time by giving you more than what you asked for. Next question.
Aaron Huslidge of Durham, North Carolina, here on the panel. Huslidge, I don't know why I said his name wrong this time. What does the panel think of Tony's show? What did the panel think yesterday?
Yeah, go ahead, George.
I love to watch Tony's show on Apple TV. It was really good. I normally catch Rihanna on the back end late nights, but I think she's a very, I think she's a great personality as far as speaking. And definitely the whole space, the topic was really great last night. I really enjoyed it. It was a great watch, I have to admit.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd have to say that it was his best one yet. I mean, from a technical standpoint, we had some issues at the beginning with some frame rate stuff, but we were able to move past that pretty quick just with a really good conversation. And I think that as Tony's got more than 20 shows under his belt now, he's just becoming a more relaxed, and we're seeing his personality really come through, which is, what makes a show. And I think the teleprompter that he got really relaxed him a bit because he was able to look where he wanted to look. And having less people, just having a one-on-one seemed to be another element that made it into a much just watchable show. And it probably made it easier to cut on the back end. So big shout out to Aaron behind the scenes, cutting that show, and Talaluk producing that show. Those guys deserve round of applause for helping Tony out and really moving this thing forward.
Good, Sky.
That's yes, the credit to the people behind the scenes that again, the producing of this, the practice. Tony's continuing to get stronger, more confident with being at peace and at ease with his guests. Of course, Vienna is a gift in so many different levels of personality, of intellect, of knowledge, and so of interaction. That she admitted that she was shy was a behind the scenes thing, but this community loving into her. This is her area of place to practice being public speaking for her future, and that we all learned about space and medical issues. That was almost the secondary thing because we're having such a good time. So it was a wonderful experience. Now, technically, yes, and that's the one thing in after hours. Immediately, people started doing a debrief of this needed to happen and that needed to happen, and I just wanted to give Tony the space to go. We did this thing, and that was the beautiful part.
Go ahead, Tony.
First, I want to say thank you to the community for all of the support. And I want to thank the community for the teleprompter. But Guy, we didn't use it last night. That was actually the old setup. And I just tried to concentrate and tweak it as best I could in terms of making the eye contact. So that was actually the same old system. But I am going to get the teleprompter up. And first, let me just say this. Vienna Tran, wow, what a treasure. And she flipped the script on me last night. She started asking me questions, and we actually had a fantastic exchange. And I learned more about her last night than I knew. I knew she was a great personality, great sense of humor, but some of the things that we learned about her last night was really, really great. Glad we had that conversation. I just want to say thank you again to the community for all of the support. 22 shows down. Thanks.
Amazing. Well done, Tony. It gets better all the time. It really does. It's really amazing. All right, next question.
We're moving out to Israel. Ari Block here is up next with, would a boom-mounted shotgun microphone do a good job of getting audio from two panelists seated side by side? Or is this type of microphone meant to be used to pick up a single person?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, this really is one of those, it depends questions, because the room makes a lot of difference here in this situation. When you say you have a boom on a shotgun on a boom, it would be good to have a shotgun on a boom with a boom operator as well that can kind of pivot that mic back and forth between the speakers. But again, you can pick up a lot of extra stuff with a shotgun mic. It might be better to go with closer miking in general. But it really depends on your situation. So it could work. Just get the shotgun as close as you can to each of the mouths that it's miking.
Go ahead, Ari.
So the context of the question is that this is a live stream, and the primary miking is next, actually wireless Rode Go 2s, two sets of them on the people, and there were some issues with that, still looking into that, but this, I'm thinking of it as a backup, not as a primary. And I've only used them in the context of getting audio from one person, one talking head at a time, so hence the question.
Sorry, I got on the wrong page. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Ari, that's exactly the way you should use it. Wire them if it's a two-shot and you're streaming and you don't have room above to have the boom out of the shot. It does a point of diminishing returns, but I always do the same thing. I'll wire somebody up with lavs, but I'll also have a boom over them. And a lot of times I pick that boom audio, for a lot of reasons. One is it sounds natural, and the other is that sometimes the lavs have a little glitch in them, and you need to switch to an alternative audio source.
Go ahead, Stuart.
I'll get to my answer in a second. My Discord has just beeped, and Ms. Tran says, thank you all very much for the nice comments.
Oh, that's very good.
Okay, but okay, with using a shotgun on two talent, you end up running into an issue with the hypercardioid pattern and not getting enough sound from either if it's pointed to the middle of them. The problem with turning it from one to another depends on the amount of skill of the talent. If you're working with actors or people who are on-screen talent all the time, they won't even notice that the microphone is moving because they're used to seeing it. But if you're working with somebody who is not in front of the camera all the time, that movement out of the corner of their eye will upset them. It'll take them out of the moment, and it will affect what they look like on camera and what they sound like on camera. In that case, you're better off with a cardioid mic, not a hypercardioid mic. So a really good handheld mic on the boom between the two would actually get you better results than a shotgun mic.
Sorry, I lost my screen. So someone else needs to, I don't know what the next person is.
I think it was me, and I'm just going to duplicate what everybody said. The one thing is just environment. If you're doing this outside or in a noisy restaurant or something like that, an overhead boom will pick up more ambient sound along with the voices than any close mic circumstance will. So if it's going to be noisy, or if the noise is part of the environment, that becomes a more primary thing. But as a backup for live, individual lavs, it's just a great safety thing to do as a standard procedure. Wire the lavs, but if something goes wrong with either of them, you get clothing rustle or something like that, as somebody said, I think it was Tim early, you get something to cut to save your audio track.
Whoa.
Looks like we need to circle back to Ari.
Well, yeah, just Mitch, what you mentioned about the glitching of the wireless, that apparently is exactly the case. And I don't know if it's the particular equipment or something other than that. And again, the backup. But what other things in putting together a backup scheme would you recommend?
Me personally, a wired lav as opposed to a wireless lav. As they suggested, the boom shot, sometimes you can't get the boom into the shot because it's so wide. So in some cases, you can flip the boom over and do it off the floor, and there's less bounce off in that particular instance. But not a lot of options there other than what you're hearing suggested here in the panel.
Were they walking around, or were they seating?
No, they were seated in a semicircle, 4 people. And again, 2 wireless Rode Go 2 packs, 2 mics on each going into the ports on the ATEM. No audio processing on the ATEM, and that was the audio chain there. And there were some glitches.
I will say that if no one's moving, I will always use a wired. I mean, I have varied from that maybe 10 times in the last 10 years and paid for it almost every single time. so it's, like that there's some kind of audio glitch. So if people are walking around, if they need free movement, then you need a wireless. The wired becomes really problematic. Even if someone's standing and just tending to pace, the wired becomes a thing. But if they're going to sit down, as soon as I have a seat, I'm going to wire them in. And it's just, it may seem old fashioned. Some of the hosts will tell me that, oh, I didn't have to do this before. DBF told me that she always gets a phonak, like all these, there's all these things that happen, but the wired is always almost always gonna work. By the way, this is us doing exactly what you were asking about, which is, this is probably, 12 years ago. But this is using that shotgun. That actually worked just fine. There was actually another mic hidden under, you can't see it on the other side of that blanket, but you can see that the reason that blanket's there is, of course, to absorb more of the audio, and you can see we're doing it in Teratron there. There's a teleprompter there on the side there, but that in a controlled environment worked fairly well as far as gathering that up. It does take a little bit of tweaking on the post. Sorry, did someone mute me? Did you mute my video, or did it?
No,
it just muted on its own. It's so weird.
You're back now.
Your audio didn't mute. Your video.
I know. I am not hitting mute on my video. It's happened a couple times in the last. There it is. So it just muted.
You're not using a Stream Deck, are you?
I'm definitely not using a Stream Deck. I don't use it. I don't use it in production. So I use it for comms. That was weird. Hold on. Let me see if it does it again. Sorry.
We see the image.
Yeah. All right. We'll go to let's go to the next question. I don't know what happened there.
Okay, we're moving on to Douglas Carmichael. Douglas's question is, what software would you recommend on Mac OS that would act as a traditional tape recorder, i.e. start it quickly and record to a multi-channel WAV file to edit later?
Dennis?
So I use Audacity. It's free and it works for me.
Go ahead, David.
Rogue Amoeba has a product called Paizo. It's a little $19 single thing just for doing just what you're looking to do.
Oops. I just cut somebody out. Go ahead and raise your hand again. Sorry, I'm having some trouble with the gear here. Go ahead, Bill.
I always use Final Cut for all that stuff because the audio engine built into it is basically Logic. It is a subset of Logic. It's nice and clean, and it gives me all the rest of the tools. So I've stopped using DAWs or anything else and just use Final Cut for all my audio work as well. I'm weird that way, though.
Go ahead, Greg.
I'm a huge proponent of Twisted Wave. It's a really nice piece of pardon me, it's a really nice piece of software. It gives you anywhere from one channel. I've done over 32 channels, I think, as one file, and it saves it as one multi-channel wave as was asked for. It's also iOS, and they've got a web version of it as well for editing. It's a great simple editor, low overhead, really nice piece of software.
Yeah, and one that we use a lot when we're doing what we have Dante is Boom Recorder. Does anyone use Boom Recorder? That's another one that we've used, and that is really common if you have a Dante input into you pass them all via Dante into a laptop, and Boom Recorder is pretty popular in that area. Next question.
Next one comes from Sky Gleason here in the panel, and Sky says, producing is part skill, part experience. Where does the world of producing fit into the to the office hours community conversation?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It fits into all of it because as a producer, you have to be concerned with everything. I always thought that being a producer meant you had to worry about everything. Audio, video, lighting, the script, who's paying for it, all of those things. And I might divert her just a little bit, but as a freelance editor, you technically are a freelance editor / producer because if a client isn't sitting in on the edit, you're making decisions on their behalf. That's a producer. So more and more things require producer skills, and I think just about everybody on this panel is a producer.
Go ahead, Rupert.
In terms of what fits in, I think we have to remember that we're entirely interactively driven. So the Office Hours does a really good job of serving the audience, the community, in answering the questions that that come up, and spans all of those areas of skill and experience, and even the artistic creation element of it. But then, the second hours obviously focus on topics that are of interest to the community and that come up. But then in after hours, where you see the labs and things, that's where some of the real artistic skills come out.
Yeah, absolutely. Got Bill.
I was just going to say at the last Creative Summit, a young woman named Sasha, and I don't know her last name, and I'm sorry about that because she was fabulous, did probably the best single seminar that I saw through the whole week of it. And it was about exactly this, about producing, what it takes to be a producer and what it takes to do it well. I just think she did a brilliant job. And so Chris Fenwick knows her. She works for the same company he does. If there's any chance you can track down who she is, and maybe that's still up online, I would watch that if you're interested in producing. She was fabulous.
Yeah, and also I'd say to if you want to talk more about producing, put it in the second hour. Happy to do those. I think we've had some discussions about those, but definitely be precise about what you want to talk about in producing. Put it in the second hour, and people can vote those up, and then I'll throw them in. I'm always looking for subjects, and I think producing is, I think in a lot of ways, as been said, what's been said before, is that when we are all of us are kind of learning to produce better by all talking about all these things, by creating a situation where we have a general understanding about lots of the aspects. It definitely helps us do a better job as producers. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I guess my question is the organization of a thing, the making a thing happen, and the responsibility of taking a hold of it and then handing off those responsibilities to others that have the different disciplines in the audio, the video, the writing, the set, the deck, all of that. So that's where, yes, I'll be very happy to put something in the second hour. That sounds awesome.
And I think that there's the
Shannon
goal
could come back. Shannon's awesome.
Absolutely. The goal a lot of time for us is to get to a point where we're hiring each other. So sometimes we're a producer, sometimes we're working on the job, sometimes we're doing those things, and all of us understanding what those things are. When you produce things, you become a better technician, and when you're a technician, you become a better producer. So having different roles at different times definitely improves. If you're always a technician, you're not conscious to what you're doing that is making the producers crazy. And if you're always a producer, you're not conscious to what the technicians are going through, so I think that, bouncing back and forth is really useful. Like I learn a lot when I was one of the first times I've ever been a panelist. On Saturday, I was a panelist and not asking questions or host. And then I learned a bunch of things about the panel view that I was like, oh, I got to fix this. so it was a bunch of things I saw because I was doing something else. So it's really important to move around. Next question.
It comes from somebody named Alex L. in Nevada, California. Hopefully it's a good question here.
This guy's crazy.
It says, what do we think of Web3? What does that even mean?
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
So there's Web 3 and then there's Web 3.0, a couple of different things. Web 3.0 is the notion of everything on the web will be machine readable. That's just a concept, basically. It's a extension of the worldwide, the W3C. Web 3, as is in the question, is a foundation that works around technology for blockchain technology, of kind of open source movement for that area. They seem to be very active last year, it seems, not so much this year in terms of their publications and things that they've done online.
It seems to be like something that just keeps coming up in conversations, but I have a hard time separating it from hype. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So a few years ago, I was on a podcast and we were talking about blockchain, and I said, I can't wait for the day that somebody could actually do something like a podcast through a blockchain. So basically, you would then send me money, and then I would give you a subscription to that show. And everybody said, no, that's not how blockchain works. But that is how blockchain can work, and that's where they're going with this. The other thing that I like about this is anybody that's doing at-home remote stuff, such as video production, graphics, for example, because now we've found that we can actually build lower thirds using HTML code. We've built clocks and things like that. You can do it from your home. You can throw it, pass it through on the internet in a more encrypted area to somebody else who can then take that information and put it into their show. It's going to be a pretty interesting thing. It's also going to be a big data pull because it's more protected, encrypted data. So it's going to take a bigger pipe to do it.
Next question.
Ari Block of Tel Aviv is back with, I'm planning to get a Korg Nano Control 2 MIDI fader for the ATEM. Any other recommendations to consider?
Go ahead, David.
If you can find it, it's a legacy product from Behringer, the BFC 2000. I dug one out of a closet. It's got motorized faders, and supposedly it'll do all that fun stuff with the ATEM.
Ari?
Yeah, again, the larger context is use of ATEM, of audio features of the ATEM. I actually think that would be a very interesting second hour. I was impressed with this little device. Some on after hours are using it and looking for an option.
Yeah, we should definitely put it in the second hour, and we'll find a time to talk about our interfaces for the ATEM. Next question.
Alton Christensen in Brooklyn is up next with best cost-effective adapter to attach a Rode Go Lav to the USB-C port on an iPad Pro.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, actually, I was curious about this same solution, getting a Rode Go Lav into other devices. The easy one that pops up for me, and the Mac people will actually have to confirm whether this works, is an analog to digital sound card that hooks up to an on-the-go cable. Now, the Mac, that might not work. It will work on an Android device. But we also need to know whether it is the Rode Go or the Rode Go 2, because the new one will use a USB-C to USB-C cable to go straight into a PC, a Mac, an Android phone, or an iPhone. So the new one is the better choice when it comes to doing this.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just to follow up, as long as it's class compliant, it'll absolutely work. So USB-C across the board on the iPads, no problem, as long as it's class compliant.
Next question.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California, is up next, and there's a very simple question: RTMP versus SRT.
Go ahead, George.
So Noah, RTMP is going to allow you to, for many given encoders, you could stream at your live stream. SRT is just going to allow you to move content from across the web from one place to another destination. But RTMP is what is normally used for everyday streaming. I mean, there's different flavors within that, but I think it's definitely two different things. RTMP is what you're going to want to use for streaming.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm not sure, but I think encryption was kind of an afterthought with RTMP, whereas SRT was secure out of the gate, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the RTMP, as George said, is a much more common format to get into basic CDNs. If you have the choice of SRT over RTMP as a contribution, I would definitely use SRT as a contribution method to get into the cloud. Normally, that's not what a YouTube or a Facebook's going to want to get. But to get into as a mezzanine, to get into the cloud and then do something else with it, I would definitely consider SRT. Next question.
Comes from our own Guy Cochran. I'm sorry, Aaron Giancarlo for Guy Cochran. Aaron's in Flagstaff, Arizona, and he says, question for Guy. In the after hours yesterday, it was stated that you may know how to connect Bluetooth to a Facebook portal for better audio than the onboard mic. Can you explain the Bluetooth setup, please?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, this is on the Facebook Portal Plus, so it's the larger one. And you do go into the settings, and you're able to choose which headphones that you want to use. I connected my just regular AirPods, and they appear in Zoom as an option, but you do have to quit out of Zoom, go back after you've enabled Bluetooth, so it's in the settings, and it's not on the little Facebook portals, not on the 8-inch and the 10-inch that I've tested. It's only on the Portal Plus, and that's the new one and the old one. So this is the older model, and there is another newer model out as well.
Next question.
Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs is up next. He says, Alex and Jason recommended the Monoprice 8x8 HDMI matrix. Unfortunately, they've been out of stock for weeks or more. Current ETA is April 1st, 2022. Any other recommendations?
I actually don't know of anything else like it at the same price point. I mean, there's definitely some industrial versions of this that are like 3 or 4 times as expensive. I will say I use it every day now. Like I'm constantly switching between stuff, so I'm pretty happy with it. But I don't know of any other solution right now.
Yeah, I totally love it. Alex, do you think that's our fault? Probably a little.
I think the biggest. I think it's less our fault and more the fault of chip manufacturing. The chip crunch is making everything hard. Like their 16-channel XLR AVR is back ordered for 6 months or something like that. Same type of thing. Next question.
Comes from panelist George Kennedy Jr., Washington, D.C., and he says, Alex, you often speak of the need for access to broadband for the masses. What are your thoughts on the funding in the current infrastructure bill just passed?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I just wanted to add some context to George's question at this point. All of this does include specifically $65 billion worth of investment in broadband specifically. So that's it's a pretty good number, and it's obviously some needs out there. The Fiber Broadband Association jumped on this. I mean, they've been working in the background, watching and waiting for this. I'm sure, I imagine, and they jumped on it straight away. Engaging with their members to say, hey, look, this is happening. And there's an opportunity to, do some business, but get fiber out there.
George.
Definitely, as Rupert mentioned, 65 billion, definitely good news. But what is all, when it comes into all the politics, folks like Verizon and Xfinity that have a lockdown, let's say in the Washington, D.C. area, how are we going to get past these folks that have a lockdown and don't want to give up their little portion of the industry per se? I mean, I'm doing some work in my backyard right now, and I'm looking at all these crazy legacy cables that are just hanging onto my house. And I'm hoping that as a consumer, I'm going to be able to say, as we do in office hours here, I have one line coming into my house. I just want to be able to run lines into my house and have control over that. So it's going to be interesting to see what that $65 billion does.
Yeah, go Jason.
My sincere and only wish is that it's not used entirely for stuff like subsidizing current internet and instead directly doing upstream development of, gigabit and hopefully fiber to the house. But of course, that means that it has to be set as a Title II common carrier, and we don't know if that'll happen.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I want to echo what George was saying. I'm hoping that $65 billion translates into something that the average American can appreciate, that it affects them personally, because a lot of times this kind of money tends to be pork barrel, and it goes off into all the coffers of the big carriers out there. So let's hope that this affects people in a very personal way and in a very good way.
Go ahead, Charles.
So the one thing I don't hear often about is that this is actually over the next 10 years, right? This is not just for this year. This is going to be spread out over the next 10 years. And just as a number, just the military spending for this year is $770 billion. So that puts into perspective what this thing actually is.
Go, Rupert.
I want to add the point, but the focus is for places that have little connectivity right now. So, I mean, if you've got some kind of broadband right now, you're not a priority for this kind of project. It's to get, connectivity out there to the places that have really very few choices or very little bandwidth to begin with.
I think it'll make almost no impact. I hate to be the downer on this whole thing. We can talk about what we hope, but at some point we have to talk about the reality of it. It's not enough money. It's not, the goals aren't clearly defined. When goals aren't clearly defined, it's a good PR release and not something that's actually going to achieve anything. It'll be a money grab by the cable companies. There'll be a couple press releases about how some kid has it in West Virginia now, but it won't make any real impact for most Americans. I mean, what we really need is policy decisions that hold telecommunications accountable. We sold them all these airwaves, for 5G and everything else that we're talking about, and all we had to do was say, you have to spend all this money, and you have to promise that everywhere that you have coverage, it has to cover everyone. If you said that and you made it, you put that into law, a lot of things get fixed real quick. And the reason we don't do that is because I won't get into that. But anyway, it's not going to make any difference. Next question.
Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California is up next with, at which part of the camera chain, sensor, data bandwidth to record media, codec, and so forth, does bit depth originate? Does this differ with raw media?
Go ahead, Stuart.
This is actually an answer in two parts, because there are two different bit depths that affect your final output quality. The one most people aren't aware of is the steps between black and white on the sensor. How many steps of resolution they've got. It'll often be referred to as stops, but it is actually the bit depth of the sensor itself. Now, the one everybody else is aware of is the output of your camera. And that depends on what type of output you're using and what sort of connection you're using. For example, the Scion sitting behind me, if I use the SDI output, I get 10 bits bit depth. If I use the Thunderbolt port, I get 12 bits bit depth. It's still raw files and they still edit the same way, but they've got a different bit depth. It comes down more to how it's connected and what you're recording to. If you're recording from HDMI, you can be recording at 8-bit or 10-bit. SDI is generally 10-bit. But you've also got to have a file format that handles that bit depth, which is ProRes and BRAW and other flavors of RAW. But that's the one that everybody is aware of. And that comes from the image processor that's in the camera, not from the sensor.
Yeah, the sensor is generally capable of 12-bit. It's definitely, or something that we relate to 12-bit, because the raw sensor is electrical impulses to the photosites. So when you say raw, it's not really a bit depth as much as it is. These are the numbers that I had when it hit. And so the quality of that sensor is just it's how many floating numbers is it handing off to that, and what is the errata? The errata is how inaccurate. So as those photosites get smaller, they have more errors because they have less light to work with at one time. That's why the Canon ME20 they took a full size sensor and made it 1080p. And because those photosites are massive, they're very accurate, which means they can have a 4 million ISO and still show you an image. Like, you can't literally see in front of you, and they're shooting an image that you can broadcast. So the and X27s are kind of like that for other purposes. And so so those are the sensor itself is just electrical impulses on red, green, and blue. And then that has to get processed, as Stuart said. It gets processed out into a video signal that we can use if we're doing it live. It has to be once it comes out of there, whatever it came out as, that's, anytime it gets, like anything else we do in media, when it gets truncated into something else, you can kind of bring it back up to where it was before, but it's never going to be the same. Like once you throw the data away, it's like going to JPEG and then going back to a TIFF file. You already went to JPEG, so you lost a bunch of data that was there. And so those 10-bit, as Stuart was alluding to, the 10 bits is 8 bits is 256 levels of gray per channel. 10-bit is 1024, and 12-bit is 4096. And those levels of gray give us more detail. So as we have way more little levels of detail that we can have in there before they start to posterize. So where you really see that is soft skies, gradients, all those things are things that start to clip or not clip, but stair step, because there's not enough data there from one color to the next. So to the question, it has to exist everywhere, for it to stay, for it to be to stay at that rate. Now, you can get around that a little bit with scaling. So if you capture something, let's say at 8-bit, 8K, convert it to 10-bit and scale it down to 1080p, you're actually going to gather some of that back in, because the bicubic calculations will put some of that back into it. It's not as good, but it is something that will recover some of those things. And so there is a little bit within scaling, if it's scaled within the new bit depth, that you can get some of that back there, but it's not perfect. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Rob Collins in Kansas City, Missouri. Rob Collins, and Rob asks, is office hours overkill for help with setting up a nice Twitch stream?
Go ahead, David.
No, nothing exceeds like excess.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is what we do. We do over the top. That's what we do. Rupert.
Yeah, I mean, turning things up to 11 is a good thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's our culture. Go ahead, Guy.
I'd like to say that we start off really easy. Somebody like Roscoe has a really small, like $20 ring light and a Pile microphone, and I'm not sure what his webcam is, but it's that evolution. And as you either get more viewers or get more budget, get more kudos, whatever it is that helps drive the budget to turn it up to 11. So maybe the next step's an A10 Mini, A10 Mini Extreme, a Pocket 6K. But the share your setup in the Discord is a good place to kind of explore what everybody's using. So jump in there and scroll through and look what people are using. But I think you'll find a nice combo for Twitch.
Yeah, the definitely in office hours, it is any question you have as you're starting to put together your Twitch stream. How should I do my graphics? How should I do the camera? How should I capture the computer? Whatever that is for your Twitch thing, feel free to use office hours as a way to do that. And then feel free, as Guy was talking to, using Discord to ask questions there, and also after hours. So jump into after hours, hidden at the bottom of your email you get every morning. There's the little link, and you can jump in and come in there, just turn it on and start asking questions. People will help you at every moment, in that process. And that's what we're here for. Next question.
Comes to us from Gualberto in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And his question is there a way to stream to Instagram without breaking their terms of service, TOS?
Go ahead, Jason.
And me without my reverb effect. No. The short answer is no.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, some people have tried to do the phone-to-phone type thing or phone-to-screen type thing, and then of course if you have like a monitor behind you, you can do something very similar to it. But why would you want to risk your account simply by doing a stream like that when there's so many other options out there that'll allow you to hook up your vMix, hook up your Ecamm or any other system into the stream so you can push it out there.
I have been told that Instagram is no longer, from fairly good sources, Instagram is no longer enforcing the TOS. They know that they haven't changed the TOS, but they're no longer enforcing it because they've just run into there's too many people using it. There's too many high profile people using Yellow Duck and using a variety of other ways to pull the direct feeds into it. I still won't do it, or at least there'll be emails from me to a client going, "This is a bad idea." So my kind of CYA related to that is to tell clients over email, "This is a violation of the TOS." We are capable of doing it, but we don't recommend it. If they want to stay inside of the TOS, then we do build the camera to screen rig, which is not trivial. I don't have a quick setup for it. To get it right, it takes a day of setup to tune it completely. I don't have a way to do it quickly, so it is a thing, but it works perfectly. You wouldn't be able to tell, or people haven't been able to tell that it was a full on $500,000 system running into Instagram. so anyway, or coming in from satellite from a sat truck into Instagram. They don't, it just looks like a phone. So and there's a bunch of other reasons that you want to do it that way. Is also that you get in other platforms, you often get more organic spread if you're coming in over a phone than if you're coming in. So it's beyond the TOS. The reason that the camera to screen is a useful tool is because you get more viewers on some of the platforms, because they'll give you they benefit the phone over RTMP. Next question.
Noah Sargent, Fullerton, California says, have you ever worked with an employer who gives breaks during the day to try to save on overtime? And if so, thoughts?
Go ahead, George.
So now I'm going to try to break this down quickly. So generally when I'm hired as a freelancer, let's say by 090, I may work to the entire day and just take short breaks as needed because that's a relationship I have with them. Now, if I'm on a crew where, let's say I'm working for a staffing company, that's a given and a must because they're driven by, overtime. So yes, the client is going to be required to give breaks during that day to save on overtime, because once you hit that overtime and you're working for a particular staffing company, they're gonna the bill is going to rack up easily. So they have to give breaks during the day to save in that overtime.
Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
It's a deep subject, but I can certainly say in corporate or enterprise, there's a notion of what you might call a professional working day. It's a give and take type arrangement, and particularly if you've got special projects, there's another notion of toil, time off in lieu. So you may be having to work late, and everybody may agree, hey, we're going to take a long lunch, or we're going to come in late tomorrow because we had to do a certain project or something. But it's a deep subject.
Go ahead, Bill.
Exactly what Rupert said. This gets very, very deep. And I'm going to, very quickly, little story. I've been walking the last couple of days early in the morning before dawn. And yesterday, as I was walking back toward the house, I thought, man, that sunrise is just beautiful. I wish I was shooting. I wish I had my camera crew with me because it's really gorgeous. And so I finished my walk. I took a shower. I got out and I looked out on the patio, and it was 5 times better than it was when I was walking. In a shooting situation, if I'm trying to capture something truly beautiful, the ability to stay around, linger, and even if I've got a crew of 10, you're always in conflict. How do I get my art done the best way I can and yet not abuse everybody working around me who are sitting there waiting for something like a sunrise to develop? This will never be an easy thing, and it can never be codified down into this number of hours. I truly appreciate what the unions and the rest of that do, because it can get abusive as you're chasing those aesthetic wonders, but it's not easy.
You go ahead, Mitchell.
I think Bill makes a good point. I think if the crew buys into your vision, you might be able to stretch things a little bit. But if you start gaming the system, the crew becomes suspicious and the red flags start to go up. And then when they bring the pizza out for lunch, then you got a problem.
You go ahead, George.
And please, for those of you that's going to hire a crew, establish those parameters in the beginning, because you're just going to have those 1 or 2 people on the crew that's going to cause chaos for your entire project. So just establish it in the beginning.
Yeah, as a producer, I don't do it very often. I don't do long breaks. There have been times when we have a huge crew and we have to do a 3-hour lunch or something like that to stretch a couple hours, because it's a difference of like the show getting done or not. So I don't think that it's easy to say, oh, you can't do that, because you sometimes the only reason the show is happening is because you're sticking within, and usually it's not sticking within regular hours. It's just not going into double time or going into other things like that. And usually it's all within the rules of generally labor rules within union established rules is usually what we stick pretty close to. It's very rare though. Like it's very rare for me to go down that path. As a contractor, when I'm brought in, I charge a day rate, and that day rate is starts at midnight and ends at midnight. Like it's not like I'm a little bit more expensive, but I hate clients thinking about hours. So like within reason, I will work whatever hours are necessary for my day rate, and I don't charge extra because I don't like clients feeling like they have that, and and they hire me, they pay more money, but they don't have to think about it anymore. Like once they thought about that number, it's not variable. I'm not saying that everyone should do it, but I'm saying that it's highly effective. To have just a straight rate, and then people who work you into the ground, just don't do that again. Don't work with them again. And I have lots of people that I work with that are straight days, and now they charge me the same if they're traveling as if they're there. Like it doesn't matter. It's like a number that I'm doing for you. But I prefer that. I'd rather just pay that because it's much easier on my books to just pay them a little bit more than to try to figure it out. And it all averages out. And I still do everything I can as a producer to take care of them because they're usually the most valuable people in my crew. Next question.
Moving on, it's George Washington Jr. from Washington, D.C. here in the panel saying, Alex, during the second hour with special guests, are we allowed to raise our hands to a question we have asked?
Yeah, I mean in the back end. Don't raise it in the front end, but in the back end, absolutely. And if I missed it, I apologize if I did that yesterday. I don't remember missing one, but yeah, feel free to do that, and we'll try to be more conscious to it if we weren't yesterday. Yeah, you were gonna say, George?
No, you didn't miss anything. I know I kind of asked a lot of questions yesterday. I thought about it, but because no one else was raising their hand, I didn't want to. So it was just a question. You didn't miss anything. Just
Okay,
wanted to
good.
let you know that.
Yeah, because I think that I'm fine with it. There's a lot of back and forth that we've had about that. I feel like it's a benefit. The panelists go through the trouble of getting their cameras working and their audio working and being available and sharing their knowledge. One of the benefits of that, in my opinion, in the second hour is that they can actually interact with whoever the guest is. So I'm fine with you raising the hand. I think that's a benefit of being on the panel. So I think it's fine for you to ask that question, raise your hand, ask them, elaborate, et cetera. So I think it's fine. Go ahead, Rupert.
I guess there's a couple different cases there too. If you've got a question lined up and there's something you're going to want to add to it, you may want to get your hand up in advance, ahead of that.
Right.
Or, as the question's being discussed, you may want to come back with something. And but I think the good rule is, put your hand up as soon as you spot that you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Gilberto is back from Santa Cruz, Bolivia with another question. Does anyone know if ZoomOSC mutes or unmutes function works inside breaking rooms, maybe breakout rooms?
And let's hold on to that one until Andy comes in. He's going to come here in just a minute, and we'll let him answer that question. So let's just don't send that one away. Let's go. We will jump to the next question.
Yeah. So Douglas Carmichael's up next with what linear digital audio workstation, non-clip based, would you recommend for Windows instead of Studio One? I'm a Studio One user concerned about the Fender acquisition of PreSonus and what it means for the future of the product.
I don't know if we have anybody. I don't have anybody with an opinion about that one. Let's go to the last question for the first hour.
And that comes from Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs. And Steve says on Monday, he used ZoomOSC for a webinar and had to change some companion buttons to reflect changed names, added she, her after joining. Tuesday, he moved to ZoomOSC and companion to a Mini M1 and couldn't change the names in companion. What settings should I look at?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, let's talk about the ways that you can change a name in companion, because to understand your specific situation, we need to know which system you're trying to use. So number one, you can send in a name to companion simply by typing the name on the key, and that'll format it in which way you choose. I assume that's not what you're doing, though. I assume you're using the dynamic variable system inside of our module for companion, which will automatically populate the name of the user on the key for you. Now, there's a couple of things you have to watch out for. Number one, you need to be using a licensed version of ZoomOSC in order to be able to do that. And then you say that it's when you moved. So I would suspect that, yeah, looking at when you moved computers, maybe the license didn't transfer. You might want to double check that. In terms of not being able to change the names in companion, there's a little help icon next to every module that is in companion. And when you look at our help module, it tells you all of the states of all of the variables that are inside of the module. So if you have any question about, is it receiving data? Is that data up to speed? You just look at that little list and it will show you all the different variables that you can call and what they're currently set to. So that's how I would start to debug a system like that. You can always reach out to our support email though, and we'll try to help you out there if you need more assistance.
We got another question for Andy now that he's here on
Right.
OSC.
We move the one from Gualberto in Bolivia back up. Does anyone know if ZoomOSC mutes or unmutes functions work inside breakout rooms, I believe?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head, but what I do know is that some co-host features work in a breakout room and some don't. So it's always a little dicey, and that's why I hesitate to give you a straight answer. I think it would. It would be intuitive that it would. Again, you always have the option of checking the ZoomOSC log. Anytime we send an OSC command to us, there's a log on side of, it's one of the tabs on, if you're on macOS, it's on the left-hand side. If you're on Windows, it's also on the left. It'll be the top option. And that log will tell you, did we receive the OSC command? If we did we try to do something with it? And if we did try to do something with it, what did the Zoom SDK say back to us when we did it? And again, there's different levels of verbosity that you can look at in the log. So if you send a command and it doesn't work, your first course of action should be look at the log, set it to like an info level logging level, or errors or warnings or whatever you're looking for. Send the command again, see what prints out in the log. Maybe that will help you. You know, it might say, hey, this doesn't work in a breakout room. Or it might say, hey, you don't have sufficient permission to do this. Or you're in a situation where you can't do this, like trying to multi-pin when there's only 2 people in a meeting, for example. So it'll list all that information out for you. So start there, and again, if you have any questions, you can send us an email at info@liminalet.com.
We got a couple stragglers in here. We'll go ahead and answer. Next question.
Tom Chatsworth, Eldorado Hills says, can you recommend a Mac Mini 1-unit mounting solution?
Go ahead, George.
I'm a big fan of Sonnet. Sonnet has the Rack Mac Mini, and I put it in the chat. That's the best solution. I have 4 minis here, and they're all mounted in it. Make sure you get these. These are the long range USB dongles. Make sure you get a few of those to put inside of it, so you keep connected.
Go ahead, Craig.
I was going to say the Sonnet as well. One of the things I like about them is that they've got the two Mac Mini on one shelf, and you've got a button on the front of it that actually will activate the power on/off button around the back. So all the ports are facing into the rack, and you've got a nice clear face.
Go ahead, George.
You mean Jason?
I'm sorry, Jason. Sorry.
So let's see. I'd say I'll send you the link directly, but the UC Tronics is a little bit less expensive, and in my experience, it works beautifully, including the M1s, which are a little bit different size-wise.
And last question for the hour.
Oh, and one more from George Kennedy here in the panel, and he says, do you place a bubble level on your monitors during the setup of your office space?
Go ahead, Rupert.
No, I use lasers.
Very good, George.
And Bill is smiling. This morning, I came in here to set up my prompt and so forth, and everything was off, and I couldn't figure out why. But I touched my monitor, and it was just on an angle, and I could not figure out why everything was off. So I put the bubble on my monitor, and that was it. Fixed everything.
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, and it's mostly because I have a bit of an OCD, and I will walk around the house, and I'll sit somewhere and start to align things, which has worked out great for my career as an art director. But yeah, it's just an OCD thing.
I'm the worst because if I walk up to your booth at NAB or something like that, and your paperwork, you know, like the little postcards and everything else, people have noticed that I'll sit there and talk to you and just naturally just reorder all of your paperwork, you know, back in so that they're all tidy and they're all like have even. It's really funny because I first make them tidy and then I make them parallel to the front face of your desk and then I make them evenly spaced, and it's just what I do while I'm talking to someone at a booth because otherwise because it's driving me crazy. Like I can't listen to them if I'm not at least doing something trying to fix the problem because that's just wrong. All right. We are now moving into the second hour. Our next edition of Inside Office Hours 2.0. Andy, can you give us a little bit of an update of what we've been doing over the last week?
Absolutely, yeah. And a huge thanks this week in particular to everybody who's been on the crew for 2.0 and helping us out. JJ did a fabulous job moving the system from Alex's office into a rack, and then that rack into the main 090 production space so that we can.
I will say that it looks so much more tidy. Like it's a nice little rack on wheels rather than it was like this kind of beast, which was kind of cool. It was kind of a beast with all these monitors sticking out before, and now it's like a tidy little rack that is sitting in our server room.
And in addition to it looking nice, it now ties into all the FSHDR units that are in that room, which will give us a lot. The problem was that it was a long run to get from Alex's office to the main color space and then back. And so by moving into that room, now we only need to, run a couple of feet to get into the FSHDRs. And then the other thing that we need still to do is right now the program goes out into it. So it's 4K program, goes into a Terranex, gets turned into 1080p, goes into the FSHDRs at 1080p, comes out at 1080p, and then goes into the Elemental, which upscales it back to 4K to YouTube. So right now we're going 4K to 1080 to 4K. So we're probably worse than 1080 in terms of resolution that we're pushing up right now because of all that scaling. But once the optical links for the fiber links come in,
basically there's these SFPs, and I've got the receive SFP arrived immediately. The transmitting SFP is back ordered from AJA, and I'm gonna, given that they were just here yesterday, I'm gonna see if I can accelerate that. but once I have that SFP for those, we'll be able to move that signal to 4K in and out of the FS HDR.
Right. So then moving away from HDR for now, Alex 4D and Aaron did a fabulous job redoing the super sources. So you can see those on screen now. You can see that the super sources are now prepared for the lower thirds, which I'll talk about in a second, so they don't overlap with the graphics that's there. So those are a new set of super sources that have been there. Aaron went in and pushed those in. If you didn't know, you can export and import your super source designs from MixEffect. It takes a little bit of getting used to about what it does and doesn't transfer when you do that, but you absolutely can do it. And so we exported the super sources that we had, sent them over to Alex 4D Gollner, and then he changed the super sources so that they looked better for the graphics that we were expecting, pumped them back to me, and we put them back inside of into the M1 that's running MixEffect. So a new super source set was in there. And again, all we had to do to be compliant with Office Hours 2.0 was just make sure those super sources had the same names. So long as the names are the same, the engine will be able to address them properly. So that's really easy for being able to do modular changes to it in the future. So then there's the big one that you've probably noticed today has been the introduction of graphics from SPX. So Tuomo has been really, really great and created for me a system whereby I can send a GET request from Isadora to SPX with the parameters that we want for the lower third in it. So Mukana serves up the question. It tells me the name of the asker, the location of the asker, the text of the questions, how many votes were on it, what hour it was tagged for, etc. I think the timestamp as well. And then I pull that into Isadora. I convert it into the format that it wants to use for SPX, and then I send a web request to SPX. It generates the graphic. Key fill comes out of Casper CG, which SPX is basically remote controlling. You could think of it like that. Then it comes into the ATEM, and this morning we set it up as a key for the overlay, basically. So now you can see in this configuration we have automatic lower thirds based on what the question is. Now earlier this week I also tested being able to change the graphic based on the active speaker. So the pipeline for that is ZoomOSC delivers the name of the person who's speaking. We take that name and we find the corresponding record in Mukana for the way that panelist wants the name to be presented. That's going to be your display name and your display location. We then grab those fields and we push them into SPX and say, go create the lower third with that name. So now as the TD, you never have to worry about get the lower third for that person. You just let it go, and whatever's on screen, it'll properly title. Now there's more we have to do with it. We have to make it so that it knows whether we're in SuperSource or not, so that it knows which type of graphic it should be using. And Tuomo made a bunch of different types of graphics that we can use here. So it's just a matter of building the rules and leveraging them. There's a couple more things that we need to do in terms of getting URI compliant strings to flow out of this. Every now and then there's going to be a character that we're going to need to convert. So there's some JavaScript involved in getting that all going. But that's been really cool to be able to have SPX now tied into this. It was a big missing piece that once you see it in there, I think today it really starts to look like a show when you can see the graphics and the lower thirds. Before it was just like, oh, there's some cool lower thirds and full screen video. But now you can start to see the way that's going to come together. The last thing I'll say is that a lot of the apps that we try to integrate with utilize postfix APIs, RESTful APIs, and those they make sense for databases and for web servers. A couple of appliances have also adopted them, like the AJA hardware. And it's always struck me as a little bit strange because if it's on LAN, you should hit it, in my opinion, with TCP or UDP versus a web request. It's not a server; it's an appliance. But the industry kind of hasn't come up with a standard for how to address that. Now, Isadora doesn't have a post request actor. It has a GET request that you can kind of make work, but I was getting sick of it basically. So what I decided to do is I pushed to the Office Hours open source repo a translator from OSC to basically a RESTful API. So you can send it via OSC, and then it will connect to a web server and post, get, or put the data, and then it will send back the responses either via OSC or via text file. Again, the project's open source. You can view it on the Office Hours GitHub. You can download a release copy of it if you want to play with it. But that's going to be the application that'll open up these things that don't have OSC or TCP support. And we'll use those to be able to communicate with them from Isadora as well. So a lot got done this week. Lots still to do, but that's kind of where we're at.
Let's go to the questions. If you have questions, by the way, as a note, the labs are about to get really deep. So we did an introduction at 2:00 on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday Pacific Standard Time. We're doing Isadora labs, and we're taking on show design. So a lot of the stuff we're doing for Office Hours 2.0 and kind of a smaller version, we're going to take on the cooking stuff that we're doing with Hasmukh and Damayanti, we're going to start walking through and building those things at 2:00 on these days, into the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested in what we're doing and you want to get hands-on with what we're doing, I would highly recommend trying to carve some time out around 2:00 each day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, to do that. We have to talk to Andy about next week, but I don't know if we'll do it on Thursday or not. So I will, but I don't know if
come to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, everybody's welcome.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but I would highly recommend it. It's going to get pretty deep pretty quickly. I'm already just following along with Andy. Even just yesterday while he was explaining it, I was kind of following along, and it's all starting to work in my head of like how I could do it. And I keep on thinking I'm going to end up running my house and everything else with Isadora. Like my whole house will just be kind of all set up. Let's jump into the questions.
JJ McKenna's up first from San Rafael and he says, how is SPX Graphics getting the questions from Mukana?
Go ahead, Andy.
So I worked with Chris to create a Mukana API. The Mukana API has 3 parts. It has the panelist API, which gives me JSON of the panelist. That's going to be your name, your location, your PIN number, and a couple other fields like that, whether you're online in panel view or offline, things like that. Then there's the hand-raised API, which basically is just a CSV of whether you're about to answer, are currently answering, or have already answered. That API is used for generating the super sources. Then there's a third API, and this is the question API. And what's available there is JSON that tells me the text of the question, the timestamp of the question, the number of votes on the question, the asker name, the asker location, and the hour tag. I then receive those via GET request, and then I push those into a new GET request for SPX. And then Tuomo has built out basically a plugin for us inside of SPX that allows me to receive those parameters. A couple of things on that. In the pre-show today, I talked about the importance of everybody, whether you're a panelist or a producer for the show, you want to take a look at your Mukana display name and display location. We've had them in there before. It kind of has been showing up when you see when your name appears inside of the questions page. But now this is actually going to drive your lower third, and everybody gets a lower third, because if you're asking a question, it shows up when the question's asked. You can see it on screen right now, actually, JJ and then San Rafael. It also will apply for panelists when we're actually putting your name up on screen when you're speaking. So it's important to take another look at that and make sure it's the way you want. Now, I posted a link in the chat earlier today that I'll go ahead and I'll toss it inside of Mukana in a bit. But basically the IBAN country codes, we're going to use alpha 2. So at the end of your name, again, this is inside of Mukana, not inside of Zoom, but inside of Mukana, at the end of your location, if you put the code for your country, so maybe it's going to be your city, your state, and then if you're in the United States, and then it would be your country code. So wherever you are in the world, you're going to find your 3-character country code. Some of them will be 2 characters or shorter, but most of them are going to be 3 characters. And if you put that at the end, when SPX sees that, it will generate a little flag of your country. So in my case, it'll say Washington, D.C., USA, and it'll basically, SPX will see that and put an American flag. And earlier today, those of you who live in California who put CA, reads that as Canada. So you had a little Canadian flag next to you today. So you want to make sure you're putting CA USA in order to come across as from the United States.
That's
so
great.
just everybody take another look at that, and then that'll update that graphic for us.
Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, frequent questioner here. He says, I love the choice of font. Would there be any way to only say upvote if it is one upvote and upvotes if it is more than one?
Technically, it should actually just say votes, as opposed to it should say voting or a score or something. Upvotes is not totally accurate because it's a composite of the upvotes and the downvotes. So it's not saying just upvotes isn't really accurate for what that is. I'm not totally certain that I want to put votes in. I mean, I think it's great that we've figured out how to grab that data. I'm not certain that we want to post that yet.
I will say that SPX is reactive though. So right now, if there's a negative number of votes, it will say down votes instead of up votes. Again, we can discuss what the right pedagogy is for that. But everybody should. But to Douglas's question, yes, SPX does have the ability to set rules based on dynamic input to set up the rest of the styling. So from a technical perspective, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael's. Next, is there an easy way to hand off cutting the show to a trusted panelist yet in universe?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I can let the panel decide if this was easy enough or not, but Dennis, Stewart, and Chris Fenwick have all cut the show through Universe already at this point. Again, there's more work to be done as we're adding more features and we're getting feedback from our guest TDs. Like today we don't have one because I was trying to set up the graphics, and so I wanted to deal with it myself. You know, there's some days where I can get a lot of information by having a guest TD do it, but there's also some days where I really need to hit a particular point over and over and over again, and it gives me more data to cut it myself. So on days when I'm really looking to evaluate, I'll turn it over to a guest TD. On days where I'm working, I'll tend to cut it myself. But the infrastructure is in place, and we can thank Jonas for that. Again, the Cloudflare Quick Tunnel is how it works. Universe posts its user interface to the web. Cloud Tunnel takes that through Jonas's server and then posts it behind a password with a PIN number. And then a guest can come in and cut the show, and we can set up rules for which email addresses are valid to do that, to add an additional layer of security and things like that. But it is in place. It is working. I did
now,
hear
if
from
two
Universe
people
this
were
week.
logged in, would it just go back and forth between listening to whoever is?
You can see each other doing things as well. So it's pretty neat. Like it'd be silly for the interface we have right now, but I can totally imagine a world where you can see other panels as status views and things like that are flowing between them. So it is kind of cool that you can collaborate on it. I asked Universe to fix a couple of bugs in the web UI. They're working on patching a couple of them. Some of them they said might not be ready till January, so kind of take that for what it is, but it's getting there.
And what's great is a lot of what we're doing is kind of pushing the whole system forward. You know, like it's us doing this is kind of plowing the road, so to speak. Dennis?
Yeah, I last cut the show on Tuesday. It's as Andy said, it's a web interface. You basically just click the buttons, and yeah, it works very nicely.
Yeah, I think that and that's why I'm excited about what we're doing in the afternoons. It's what I'm excited about here. Is I think that this interaction of being able to create an interface, and as more of us learn how to build these interfaces and build the brains behind it and the interfaces, we can build these bespoke solutions for our shows and eventually other people's shows. And I think that this takes what we see with StreamYard and other things like that. What they do is they funnel everybody into a certain way of doing things because that's how they made it easy. What we're doing is going the other direction and we're going to make it easy by customizing it for each show to solve that. So it's a very different, and ours is going to be open architecture. So a lot of people can continue to develop it and move it forward. So Stuart?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of cutting this show a couple of weeks ago with Office Hours 2.0, and like I could see how rough and ready the interface was, and the chatting backward and forward to Andy. So basically, props to Andy for taking the feedback on board that we've been able to provide, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that interface evolves through the future. It's a case of perhaps the way we're training each other to actually criticize in a positive manner can actually help build products like this faster, because we actually care about having a good interface, a good result for everybody. Again, moving the community forward helps all of us move forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that the because we're doing this every day, and because we have all these other test shows that we're starting to take on, I think we're going to, and what I love is that each show is very different. Office Hours is one way. The Hosmook show is going to be another solution. Belfast method is one way. Mobley process is, and the Mobley process is another one. We're pushing all these different angles and slowly finding that space as we kind of work through it. And I think that I think we're creating something pretty special, like something that's going to move a lot of things once it starts to mature. I mean, we're just still in like little seedlings with things coming up, but when it turns into a whole garden or forest, it's going to be something. Next question.
JJ McKenna back from San Rafael. How much effort would it take for Charles is the best, he parenthetically comments, to quickly color correct during the mic check 20 minutes?
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so it depends. Are we doing the whole panel, or is it individual panelists? Now, here's something that we're going to get into as we move on to HDR and having everybody be in the same tone. Exposure for each individual panelist is going to become very, very important. As Alex has stated, his 400 state average for his mapping, it's at 400. Now, that's not by accident. Most cameras, actually all cameras, have a designated 18% gray that they are supposed to register from the manufacturer. Now, each camera, it's a little different. Like the ARRI is 0.391, the Red is 4.21, the DaVinci Intermediate is 3 something. So they all fall right around 400, so that's a good base. Now, what we need to do is have our exposures, maybe like to a fault color, fall around a 400. So now we all know that we're sort of all in the same ballpark as far as our faces and the subject. Now, one way that we could be doing that, this is Isabella. Isabella is something that we use a lot to test exposure and test looks. Now, there's something called the Ed Lackman zones, right? So you could see her. Now, here's a problem that we have in the pipeline that we currently have. We're shifting a little yellow, which is shifting her exposure hues. But if you look here, that 0 is what we're supposed to have right around the middle of the face, depending on your lighting set, right? We're supposed to have that gray right in the middle. So then we know that the average of everything is going to fall right around there, right? So I'm not sure how each of us is going to do that, but if we get an 18% card, or we push out 80% through Zoom, right? And then we register it on Alex's side and through Zoom, right? Then we'll be able to see how off each person is. Now, this is getting into the weeds, but technically this is what we would do to get everybody on the same place. And the reason why you would do gray is because gray is just unbiased, right? So you will see a shift of any type of hue in your gray. It's supposed to be dead center.
Yep. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, my question for Charles is, are you establishing a style and or look for office hours similar to what Mickey has done with the 24 LUFs? Because as he stated early on, 24 is not a magic number. It's just a number he chose that is a pleasant balance for the audio. So is that what I'm hearing you're hoping to do with our group, is create a color level? Okay.
No, this is actually a standard inside of the industry that you would shoot a gray card. And if you go pump it through a pipeline, let's say for some graphics or some VFX, if you push that through the pipeline and it comes back and it's shifted, you need to fix your pipeline, right? So this is a standard that we all actually follow to make sure that the grays, because that's where skin tone tends to sit. Now, let's say if you're lighter skin, you'll sit a stop or two above. And if you're darker, you'll sit like half a stop or a full stop below. But that's the balance that we need to make sure that we hit so that we know the pipeline going through, all the way going through, it's correct. And then as we go to HDR and we push that through, we know exactly what we're trying to hit, because it's not this wide range that we're trying to hit. We know where everybody's face is sort of sitting, and we'll average out what we have right now, which is, some overexposure, some underexposure. We need to get that tightened up.
And the thing is as we move towards HDR, even just taking Zoom and promoting to HDR, what I will say is by doing these test streams all the time, I can look at our gallery now, and I can tell you that Jason and Bill are too dark, for on their faces. They're not. Chris is right on the border. Andy is darker, so he looks in SDR. He looks fine. On HDR, his lights behind him push out, and he feels like he's in shadow. Both Guy and Rupert and George all pop really nicely, and I'm watching it. So what to do is I'm watching on my iPhone every morning while we're doing this. So that test stream that goes out, I watch on my iPhone. Now there is some idiosyncrasies where I'm noticing that YouTube every once in a while will shift down into some weird tone mapping thing that I have to restart YouTube, because I think we're the only ones doing long form HDR live streams every day. So I'm noticing little things that I'm reporting back to that, to figure out what's going on there. But the and we're going to do a ruthless review next week, I think, of HDR, where we look at it, but it's a lot less not YouTube, but HDR is a lot less forgiving than SDR. So it stretches, when we stretch this out, there's a lot of things that worked okay in SDR that really look dark or really look bright. Like the highlights if I don't put product on my forehead, the highlights are very they're not that much, because I quietly did it during the show. You'll see me go like this, and that's usually me putting a little bit of something on my forehead to break it up, because it looks super shiny in SDR. I mean, in HDR, in a way that it doesn't look necessarily in SDR. So all of those things are things that we're slowly becoming conscious to, as far as that process goes. So we'll keep on playing with it. I think that what will generally happen is most of us will get into it. It's not like we're going to spend a ton of time every day doing it. I think that we get to a point where the color, and this is something for Andy to think about, is that it might make sense at some point. We will want to either put similar people through the same thing, but I think most likely what we'll do is their number will coincide with a set of settings inside of the FSHDR, that when they get routed to that FSHDR, it's told, this is the settings for that person. Like just do that color correction.
We hold databases for everything else. Why not? Right.
Exactly.
And that's the power of it, is that because we've built this state machine, we can push whatever parameters we want, including things for color, including things for sound treatment. If we know that, whatever it is, we can hold all that data and we can recall it whenever we need to.
And that's one of the things that we're thinking about related to being able to put up a tablet or a phone with this AV sync that we've been working on in the after hours, that you could literally have everybody just put this up for a second and it'll sync everybody's audio, completely. Now, one of the things that we did talk about, I was actually talking to Mark about at O&I, and he brought up, is that it will increase the latency between all of us. And so, if we start correcting all of our audio, it could add 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds to the back and forth. So this is where we start thinking about that parallel pipeline, where we as individuals are like that sync that we correct may only be synced to the show, to the output, and not to Zoom. So we're all talking to each other in whatever offsets we have, in whatever sync we have, but what goes out to broadcast has been synced as it goes out, which is a really complicated, we're starting to go down this really complicated path of multiple shows being, multiple ways that the show is being experienced. You can raise your hand twice, Sky, in the background, Charles. Go ahead, Sky.
Thank you. Now, if I can remember what my question was, I think it was with regards to the complexity of what you just talked about. Now that we are in high dynamic range, is it similar to going from an 8-bit to a 10-bit? It's an exponential amount of crayons in the color box. Is that what is that?
That's pretty much, yeah. It's a lot more colors. It's a lot more dynamic range and a lot more detail. Now, we're doing it kind of a cheat right now, because we're doing 8-bit and Zoom compression, and then we're stretching it but I will say it looks really good on my phone. You know, the HDR version of our show looks really good stretched. So even it's only 8K WebRTC essentially, or eight not 8K, but 8. It doesn't look like, you know, it does when you look at it on the phone. It doesn't look like much on in Zoom, but when you look at it on the phone, it definitely pops out. Go ahead, Charles.
So the settings that you're thinking about, do you think that you would have the full settings from the app, could say for individual panelists? You know how we had like the gamma.
Yeah, I think that what I'm hoping to do is basically have there's a base setting that I don't think we need all of the dials that you have in the FSHDR. I think you know, I work with you to pick out the 5 that matter, and we make adjustments to those 5 that matter, but we also expose those. There's going to be some point, like the ATEM switcher, there's going to be some point in Universe where there's multiple panels. So you open up panels and one person's controlling audio, another person's controlling color correction, another person's doing other things like that. And so one of them will be the color control. So while the show's going on, especially in pre-show, like, so imagine us coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning. You could have the person who's the colorist, which might be you at the beginning, but you know, to figure it out. And then it's anybody that we train that works with you on it is watching everybody in the 1 hour pre-show, just tuning everybody's color just as they're going, you know, just kind of like tweaking it all, and then doing really the fine tuning during mic checks. They're just kind of moving a couple things around. And so as we go through the mic check, someone's color correcting it while you're, while you're doing your mic check. And but that'd be a different panel in Universe with little sliders that you just kind of move, and it just tells the FSHDR what to do. Does that make sense? And then what they can do there is it could be identifying who they're controlling. When they hit lock, it saves that setting of that person into our system, so that when they come back on again, and we know that they are going through input 4 of the third FS4. And by the way, I don't know who's cutting right now, but going to those OH ones they're low resolution for some reason, and they're really distracting. Like, try not to use the spotlight ever. So that's what we're doing there. Yeah, you're gonna say one more thing, Charles?
It's just going to be interesting how we actually start to manage that, but then also incorporate the graphics.
Yeah,
because
the graphics have to come on the other end. So I don't have that solved in my head yet. I have to think. It's something that I did notice last week. I was like, oh, the graphics, we can't process the program. There's some point where we have to process all of the panelists, but we can't process. Either we have to plan for the graphics, because right now they pop out a lot. In fact, they probably pop out too much in the HDR version. One thing, by the way, Andy, to think about is when the graphics are pure white, we can't leave the lower third up that long.
So we have the ability to set the white level inside of SPX to any value we want. So we can actually tone that down.
Yeah, because if you do pure colors for as long as those are going up, some monitors will burn in. So when we go into HDR, we have to be super careful about lower thirds. And in general, if we're going to HDR in general, I would recommend that nothing hangs out for a long time. So the lower thirds come up, they're long enough to read the question. Maybe it comes back up later, but we should consider almost any graphic up there if it's not moving. So a lot of what we have to think about for all of our graphics is that they're subtly moving. And if they're not moving, they don't stay up for more than 15 seconds. It's just, that has to be kind of a rule that we have to kind of think through. That's a new kind of rule because of HDR. OLEDs the new ones are pretty robust, but it's not something we want to push the envelope of, because it'll ruin them. Next question.
George Kennedy Jr. in Washington's up next with Andy. This far in your career, is Office Hours 2.0 your greatest challenge?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, it's a funny question, because I started thinking about this kind of stuff when I was 14, working in the theater, which was 10 years ago now. So I've been out of college for like a little over a year and a half. So career, is kind of an interesting thing to evaluate. But I've been thinking about this stuff for quite a long time. So in terms of, it's hard to define what the challenge is. Really, it's the culmination of things I've been working on for 10 years with Isadora, with show control, with collaborative workspaces that people can get their hands on different components of it and tie it around. So I've always wanted to see Isadora really used in the broadcast space, and this has been an opportunity to prove why it belongs there. So that's been a good opportunity. Making ZoomOSC was pretty hard. I'm not gonna lie, ZoomOSC was pretty hard. Like, you know, so those are
as far as career goes, it was.
In terms of particular challenges, I might defer to some of those things, or some stressful show that had a very tight deadline on it, because this is a very relaxed. Like, as challenging as it is in terms of it's very complex, it's understood in that context, right? There's not a client on the other end expecting this entire thing to be ready by a certain date, where, you know, there's a lot of money on the line, you know, for everybody and all of that, and jobs are at risk. You know, that I think that would be. I've been in some of those situations, and those are pretty stressful. So
I'm just gonna say, if this isn't ready by January 1, 2023, I'm gonna be really upset. I'm just letting you know, like it.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's been a good challenge. It's one of those ones where, again, it feels like the culmination of a lot of work.
Yeah.
That I've been thinking about for like a decade. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Go ahead, George.
So I've been in this industry for a while, and I've been able to interact over time with software developers, large and small. There's nothing more rewarding than, I consider many of you here are my friends that I know for a while. There's nothing more rewarding in your gut, and that's what I feel about the whole office hours for over the 18 months. You get the butterflies in your stomach about your friends, and you see them doing well on a main stage. This is different. This is, I don't want to say software development on the fly, but software is developed behind closed doors. This is in the open. So it's good to see your friends excelling. And this is different because now it's a combination of a lot of vendors putting the pieces together or developing on the fly. Again, not necessarily on the fly, but you know what I mean, to make something happen. So I just want to show you guys, if you don't know already, that I have those butterflies in my system about office hours and what's happening.
It's a pretty special thing. I mean, we've got between Mix Effect Pro, SPX, Isadora, Universe, Liminal, you know, all of these things coming together is quite a thing, and everybody's making changes, you know, to make this work. And I do think that I think there's an opportunity. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think there's an opportunity that what we're doing changes the way we think about broadcast, where broadcast is less and less about one or two people telling us the way it is, and more about groups of people talking about things that they're passionate about. And that's what we're building the platform for. Not people just talking about media, but it could be gardening or cooking or cars or whatever they want. But it's not just one person giving a lecture. It's 10 or 15 people doing what we're doing. And I think but to make that happen and make it possible, we have to build what we're building here, because it won't happen without the infrastructure. You know, it doesn't, you know, a lot of plants won't grow without the trellis, you know, like, and it's required for it to grow up, is we have to build that structure. And so we're out way in the front building that trellis. Go ahead, Chris.
Alex, do you by chance remember, it was last summer, you had one of your kind of famous, hey, I need some people to test something calls out in Discord. And I remember George and I were a part of it. And George had a really nice camera, and you brought him in, I think, for the first time via 1080. And I remember hearing it. I don't think you were on camera, Alex, but you just went, wow.
Yeah.
This is, and I think that's kind of like this sort of the origin of this story, this thing growing up out of something, because, you know, by then, I think at that time we were very accustomed to looking at everything at 640 by 360.
Yeah.
And you were just like, wow,
you realized
George,
we could do
you
something.
look like you're right in front of me.
Yeah, and I realized that we could do something with this. I think at 640 by 360, I was kind of like, you know, it's cute. You know, we're having a good conversation. We're doing the best I can. At 1080, I was like, oh, we could
and I thought the same thing. I looked at George's picture. I just went, wow.
Yeah. Go ahead, George.
All right, Andy, before I choke myself up, what I really want to say to Andy is everyone else has contributed, but definitely congrats to you. And you started 10 years ago, and I know you might not think it's a long career, but for what you're doing right now, I think it's pretty special, and we all see it. And congrats. And I hope you're keeping yourself well doing this. I know it's a lot of work. And like I said, I've known software developers, and I know what it is to make that happen. So congratulations.
Yeah, Stuart.
Just Andy, did you say year and a half out of college? Just a nod will do.
Yeah.
In that case, thank you for making the rest of us feel very, very old.
I know.
But also,
Andy's in his 20s going on his 50s.
Yeah, if you've done this in the last few months after setting your own business up, I think for a lot of us, it's going to be a lot of fun watching what you achieve in the next 10 to 15 years. So good luck on everything, mate. You've got a big future ahead of you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next
Yeah,
question.
I'm wearing shoes that are 10 years older than you, Tony, or Andy.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas is up next. He says, how long will it take to gracefully shut down the Office Hours 2.0 hardware infrastructure, and how long for a graceful startup sequence? Can this be automated and completed without local human intervention?
Go ahead, Andy.
So my Zoom is mostly crashed right now, but can you hear me and see me all right?
Yep.
We can.
Okay, great. So the 2.0 hardware mostly will be sort of self-contained in terms of its ability to boot up and shut down. JJ and I learned some interesting things about what the Video Hub and the Constellation do and don't remember after being powered up and down. So I'll have to think about whether or not we need to have like a file that holds all the settings that Isidore then pushes those preferences into the hardware boot up. What I can say is we're pretty close, and we'll get there in terms of having Universe control truly everything in the startup procedure once we can get out of the webinar. The webinar right now has this annoying thing where we have to promote the bots to panelists to get them in here. And the only way to do that is to accept the local prompt on every bot to get it in. So at the top of the day, I'm parseced into these computers, and and the only thing I have to do is hit OK, because Universe is driving the rest of it. It gets them in the meeting, it gets them where they need to go, it gets the outputs configured, it's all automatic. But hitting the button to promote to the panelist is what's causing the issue. For after hours, even to get all the way into a breakout room, I don't have to hit any buttons on the far side. So it's kind of a disappointing reality that while we're in the webinar, I won't be able to truly automate for a remote person the entire boot up sequence until we get out of the webinar. So.
And to be clear, our goal is that there'll be some time in December where you see us starting to play with the idea of getting out of the webinar. By the end of the year, our plan is to be out of the webinar and into just a meeting. And the idea is that office after hours eventually will just exist 24/7. And office hours is a room inside of the panelists go into a room that sits inside of after hours. And there'll be viewing rooms for after hours. Like the viewing room for office hours will be another room inside of after hours. So people could just hang out in the general foyer, but they could also go in and watch the show and talk amongst themselves and, everything else. And so it'll even get better than what it was before, but it'll be in many ways simpler. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, something tells me that Boston Dynamics is creating the Terminator movie series, and we are creating the Matrix. It kind of creeps me out just a little bit.
Well, you could say that we're creating the metaverse before the metaverse exists, so next question.
James Hutchinson, Dublin, Ireland is up next. For Office Hours 2.0, are time announcements going to change to UTC? If so, when will this transition happen?
By January 1. I don't know exactly when, but it's just a matter of getting the infrastructure kind of set up and me making sure that everything's ready to go. What's holding me back is just figuring out how I want to display it. Because I think I want to say it in UTC, but then string it out in like a couple different time zones so people just get a sense of it. So, but by the end of the year, we'll be back to, you'll see Z. It'll be Z for Zulu. Zulu time, and so it'll just be 1800 Z, and it'll all be in 24-hour time. It's back to for those of you in the Pixel Core, we're back to where we started. Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael, Office Hours 2.0. Would there be a way to use the Office Hours 2.0 infrastructure to mitigate latency issues that could happen with connections from Australia specifically?
Go ahead, Stuart.
I would just like to point out that a lot of that latency is in my own system, because I'm going from camera through IP box, which converts to an RTSP feed, into a computer for vMix, and NDI back out into the virtual input into Zoom. And I've noticed that the latency going across all of that, It's longer than I see when I send a video feed out using the Raspberry Pi with Video Ninja on Raspberry Pi, and I'm watching it on another monitor when I'm sending it out via one connection and in via another. I see less latency in that than I see in RTSP and NDI.
Rupert?
So, we may see less latency if we continue to use Zoom as the real-time interaction part of it. But if we go to a different thing, we could always look at co-location in Hawaii. There is there's one location out there called the Fortress, which might be quite useful.
And it's a great place to work. Next question.
JJ McKenna back. Is there a way to save the color-corrected settings for each recurring panelists in the FS HDRs?
Go ahead, Andy.
Here's the cool thing about it. If there isn't, Isadora can, right? We could grab their preferences and save them to a file or deal with them in some way, even store them in Mukana if we wanted to. And then we grab that information as a property of that user and push it into the FSHDR through the REST API, which again, now that we have this app that can translate OSC to REST, I can actually send my settings as JSON into the FSHDR and it will do its thing. And I can get information back about its current configuration. So there's a whole world of possibilities that we get when we start to automate this hardware, like with Blackmagic and what we're doing with AJA. The idea that we can make this equipment work in a way that a human couldn't is pretty mind-blowing. Like the fact that we can store all these settings and push them all in with a single button press and get the whole system set up and ready to go, and even start to double dip on inputs here. We could have a certain color correction on different MEs that we could cut between to keep cycling through the panelists if we only have so much hardware. Things that you couldn't do by coordinating a crew just because of human input lag that we can get away with by using these REST APIs. It'll be pretty cool.
Well, and they're going to give us the opportunity to do things like we haven't even started going into. We're going to start the live event inside of AWS, and we're going to open up create a new activate the go live on the YouTube event and go live on maybe other platforms, and do all of those things can all happen with a press down eventually. So the goal is to get to a point where almost all of that's just a big machine that just kind of turns on every morning and starts to run with it. And anything that we're doing over and over again that doesn't require artistic input is done by a machine. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. How long could a piece of theme music be for the countdown clock? And how long should stinger music be for that transition between first and second hours? What LUFS value also would said music be mixed to?
It depends. So I think that we don't know yet. I think that for as far as the countdown clock, I would love for it to eventually be the length of the countdown clock be slightly different. It might be rolling through it. We had a clip that we used for a while for some other stuff I was doing that was, just this great little beep, beep, bop, beep, beep, and things just kind of moving around. But I do want to think about it in spatial. So the whatever that rolling clip should be, that time, that the countdown clock should be really in spatial. So if you're watching it there, you're hearing things moving all around you. I think for an actual open, if we do an open, is going to be no more than 15 seconds, probably 5 or 10 seconds of conversion. We do, for the graphics team, we do want to think about what we play in that countdown clock. I think that we'll want to have different things going on in the countdown clock, messaging, all the stuff that I say at the very beginning should eventually, go into the countdown clock time, so that we just get to the top of the hour and start talking, as opposed to, and it'll still be there if you watch it, but I don't think we need to embed it every single time. Go ahead, Sky.
The original music pieces that usually you can buy, they come in different increments of 6 seconds, 12 seconds, 24 seconds, 32 seconds, and they're again a theme that are in measures that have a beginning, middle, and end, each within those time lengths. So that's another thing to think about. And as far as the LUFS, traditionally I usually get at the most dB level, because I wasn't familiar with the term LUF. So I'm wondering what the dB level is of this stock music that you would normally buy.
Well, the one that I'm leaning towards to use is endemic. I think it's endemic sound. It's kind of epidemic sound. I'm sorry, it is epidemic sound, which is an odd thing I think they named it before 2020. What's kind of cool about them, it's a Swedish company that if you are paying for the subscription, they've already cleared the rights for YouTube and a lot of other ones. And you can download the stems. So I've used this for other projects where and then you can say, oh, the drums, we just had one recently where, oh, the drums had to be a little lower, and we just were able to bring those down. It was, and the audio, the music's actually pretty good. The Swedes, they're always going to give us a bunch of good music. All right, next question.
Next one comes up from Douglas Carmichael. He says, how did Isabella get its name on the test pattern that Charles showed at the beginning of the show here, or earlier in the show?
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so she comes from the film days, and Ari has always been sort of at the lead of good color management and processing, right? So they're not too focused on getting 12K clips. They're getting better footage and color, and getting the photo sites to do the best that they can in the debayer as they go out from the sensor and on. Yeah, but she's been around for a very long time.
My guess is it's probably her name. It was probably the model's name was that. It's, next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael again. It says, in the current caption, it says 10 minutes ago. Have you thought of expanding it to 10 minutes ago? 10 min ago as opposed to 10 minutes ago looks a lot cleaner.
And I think that's another data point that I think it's cool that we're able to pull it out. I think we'll probably take that out. I kind of actually, from a display perspective, don't want to be connecting the questions to time. With both votes and displays, it'll create a thought process inside of the viewers that is not something I want. So I think it's really cool that we're able to pull that data. I think that it's not, and we also need to find ways to, I'm already noticing right now that the lower third, when the question shows up over top of a full screen person, it's obviously too high. So I think we're going to want to find ways to compact that down and get rid of some of those other stuff so that we can get it underneath everyone. And this is all stuff that
there are alternates for all the graphics. This one is it's wrong for me to have it up on this configuration because it's specifically designed for
the super sources.
For this, that way it sits above, like right underneath you guys. Again, we could look at certainly other things, but there is a lot of reactive design available to us.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's great that we're finding those things, but and I wouldn't know until I saw it. But when I saw it a little bit, I was like, oh, I don't think I really want the time or the votes there. Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about the data point, it brings up something that, Alex, you bring up quite often, is that the latency of the question is much less of an issue the way we're doing this. And so it's a reminder that, this question didn't come up 20 seconds ago. This came up 10 minutes ago.
Here's the funny thing.
Interesting sales point.
Here's the funny thing that it's taken me a little time to get her head. And I've talked to Bill about this a little bit at times, is not to move questions over too quickly. You actually want higher latency because the audience needs time to vote on the questions. So low latency is actually not advantageous inside of a meaningful conversation. So a meaningful conversation where the audience is involved, you actually want the highest latency you can get for the questions so that the audience has the most amount of time to put their 2 cents in before you get to that, which is completely opposite to what everyone else thinks. So it is a better, because we have to remember that every time we answer a question that's been voted up, every person that voted on that question is a stakeholder, in that question. So they're getting something out of that process. And so we giving people time for more people to vote is actually much more advantageous than trying to answer it instantly, unless you're doing something that you're doing this thing. And the only time low latency becomes a thing is I'm showing you how to solder, and while I'm soldering, I need to talk about that question. So you need to push that forward. But in a general Q&A, the latency can be high. And one of the things we haven't solved for yet is that kind of, this is time sensitive. Let's route these questions in. And that's something a bunch of us are thinking about right now.
And it was a good example for me of how Alex has thought all this out ahead of time, because in the early days, I was trying to push him over early, thinking I was just giving the audience or the panelists more time to think about the questions and prepare answers.
Right.
And then he had to dial me back on that, because no, we're locking things and giving them no chance. I was also moving things over so early that they would have fewer votes, because that locked the voting. So these things are all really interconnected, and he's really thought through a lot of this stuff.
Go ahead, Chris.
This might throw a wrench into your design, but perhaps, and I get it that these are two different screens right now, but perhaps instead of it being locked from the voting standpoint, at the point it gets moved over, if the audience could still vote on it while even after it had been moved over, and then the Bill or a producer would lock it in position, so it's like, okay, we're definitely doing this one next. I know that changes your metaphor a lot, but I totally agree. Being able to vote on it is super powerful.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is that what we try to do is just be as responsive as possible. I mean, I think you're right that we could do that. It's just that it would start creating a bunch of variables some in other cases, whereas we can. Yeah, I don't think, and I think that at the point we chose it, then it's fine. The other, there's a whole bunch of other pieces there.
Are you also implying that we won't be doing any shows about soldering? I'm confused.
No, we are definitely doing shows about soldering. We just haven't done them yet. Go ahead, Rupert.
In terms of the timestamps on the questions for the, for the audience, for the people voting on the questions, I think it's useful for them to at least see the sort order, maybe not the timestamps, but at least the sort order, so that you can see the questions coming in recently, so you know that they are the ones you may not yet have voted on. It's useful to keep track of, that if you're voting, to see what is coming in.
In a low velocity situation, which is what we're in, so we do low velocity Q&A, what you're talking about totally makes sense. And the vote numbers and everything else, at scale, it doesn't. So, and I can't get into it too much more, but when you have more than 10,000 people asking X number of questions in a minute, you have to do something different that is different than what we're doing right now. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to note, I got hoist on this my first day in the new space here, because I had voted on something. I'm going to get ahead of it, and I put my hand up for a couple of questions, went away, did all my work, came back, and was starting to make my first announcement, and I looked up, and my answer had been voted up and was now the first one. So I literally came from my prep stuff into having to answer the first question completely unprepared, because it had been way down before it now was voted way up. It gets really complicated to manage this. It's not a simple system.
There's a bunch of other things we're working on that'll make it better. Next question.
Moving on, Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California says, so 18% gray is similar to setting gain structure for audio, but obviously more complex?
Go ahead, Charles.
So it's sort of similar, but the reason why it came about is because our eyes work in ratios, right? So it's a reason where you can be in your dark room and actually see like the details in the grays and the darks, and then you could go outside where it's super bright and your eyeballs don't get fried, right? So you work in ratios, so you're constantly adjusting. That's where that came from. Also because of film, because you're trying to expose for the subject in the middle. That's the main thing. Outside of that, the film would just go a couple of stops that are usable, so like 3 or 4 stops above, and then after that it rolls off into a shoulder, and then 2 or 3 stops below, and then that becomes the toe at the dark end, right? But the main focus is your middle gain stage, which I'm assuming, I don't know much about audio, but I'm assuming that's the average that they would go for.
Yeah, I think it is similar. Next question.
JJ McKenna, San Rafael, he says, Alex mentioned the dangers in screen burn-in 4K. Is there a similar danger from a white beard on screen for too long?
No, there's not. Partially because you're moving all the time. Like if it was a picture of a white person, not a white person, but a white beard, and it was highly overexposed, and then it was just a still image. Yes. The reason that text is a problem is because it's not moving, and it could be potentially super white, or at over 400 nits, and then it can start burning in. But it's the fact that it's not moving. Like we do text that way, but we just slowly drift it. Like if we're doing something that's going to tell you something, you'll see it slowly drifting up and down, and we do that to keep it from burning in. Next question.
Jonas Natal, Stuttgart, Germany says, could we send questions also to YouTube as a caption?
Go ahead, Tony.
So I actually am asking this question for personal reasons. I'm responding to this question for personal reasons. Conversation with Tony Mobley has an issue with when I get questions from the panel, from the attendees, the YouTube questions are difficult to bring in. I got a couple of different things going on. So the YouTube questions are being brought in, but it's not really, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. So we know that the community has no issues with using Mukana in a very concrete way and making it work. The larger audience of people who are watching Conversation with Tony Mobley are not sophisticated enough to, for whatever reason, bring things into Mukana. So I was wondering if there was a way in which, since they can't or don't seem to be able to bring in, how is there an easier way to get them into Mukana through YouTube, or
there's a
we
link.
need to look at
Put a
something
link
totally
in.
different?
Put a link in the description, and put it in the chat. It says, if you want to ask questions, click on this, and you're in Mukana. I think we have it set up for you, right? You have your own Mukana.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of giving them a link relatively often that they can get into Mukana. So we have tools. Mukana, I mean, there's a sister app to Mukana that we use that's called Commenda, which we don't talk about that much, that all it does is strip comments out of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and everything else. And so we know that we have the tools to pull it out. What I will say is that the certificate process within YouTube is a pain in the neck. And so it is, if you scale, if you ever get to the point where the show is really big, it's complicated to maintain access to all the comments that are coming in. In addition to that, as you get bigger, you're going to find that the comments are really nice when you're small because there's just a handful of people and they know you. As the comments, if your show gets larger, it just eventually attracts the predators, and the predators are, this drudge in the internet that lives inside of deep down inside of YouTube that comes out, and it's like a bile of acid, that will come out of YouTube as soon as you get to about 1,000 viewers, sometimes less. But once you get to about 1,000 viewers, this bile comes out and they just start saying horrible things on your chat, that no one wants to see again. And so your best bet is to put something. That's the reason Mukana, part of why the reason Mukana exists, and why it will continue to improve the tools to, I have literally no quarter for it, and so Mukana gives us tools that you're not going to have on YouTube ever. So what you really want to do is turn the chat off and put in the description, you can ask questions here and give them a link to Mukana, and not use the chat at all on YouTube. Like that. I mean, like that, most of the brands we work with just turn the chat off. Like it's because as soon as you get, when you're not success, when you're getting started and you've got a couple hundred people watching or less, it'll be fine. As soon as it gets bigger, it's going to be ugly. So what you want to do from day one is to constantly move people off of that chat, and into Mukana, and get them used to it. It's just what we call wetware development.
One last thing, Alex. So the way in which I do Conversation with Tony Mobley is that I generate a certain amount of questions for the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the way in which those questions are done is that I thematically start with the person's, personal history, the things that motivated them, going up to where they currently are now. And so when I put those in the panel view for me to see the questions as they are fed in,
mm-hmm.
and when the questions that the attendees are asking are put in, and then they are voted on, the questions in terms of the theme and order that I had them in get shifted because people have voted on the questions and they may not have voted on the questions.
You just have to move them over to the panel view first. You just got to move yours into the panel view because it won't change direction in the panel view. It won't matter what the votes are in the panel view. It matters when they were added in the panelist view.
Okay.
So in the operator view, it does, but in the panelist view, it doesn't matter. So you can have all yours lined up the way you want them. And then as you add new ones to that panel view, they'll all go down below that. I know we're getting a little
Okay.
deep. We can talk about it offline. So there shouldn't be a problem. Last question for the hour.
Daniel
Thank you.
McFarland in
Yeah,
Belfast, the UK says, Andy, care to share your thoughts on AppleScript underrated and how it's being used in Office Hours 2.0?
Go ahead, Andy.
I'll give you my very abbreviated thoughts. So AppleScript is super helpful when you have a program that doesn't have the ability to be remote controlled. We try to avoid those programs as best as we can, because the whole point of Office Hours 2.0 is to be able to hook into all the different applications and get them talking to each other. But every now and then you're going to find one that you just don't have another choice with. And when we run up against that wall, AppleScript is usually the solution. So the way that we use AppleScripts inside of Office Hours 2.0 right now is only for Black Siphon. Black Siphon, it's an old app. It's the only thing that does what it does the way we want it to do it, but doesn't have any remote control options. So in order to have a seamless boot, we use an AppleScript to configure it. The way that that script runs is inside of Osculator, OSCU later. Osculator is an application that allows me to take in an OSC command and then execute an AppleScript. So this basically gives the ability to trigger an AppleScript based on OSC, which we can address over the network. So in that situation, we're able to take Isadora, send a command to the computer to, in Osculator, run the AppleScript. AppleScript will configure the Black Siphon application. So everything from AutoHotkey and AppleScripts and all those types of programs that simulate input to applications, super helpful when you don't have a way to remote control. They're not the first thing I go to. First, I knock on the door and see if I can get an API. If there's an alternative to that app that has an API, this is a last resort because it's very brute force and it takes a lot of time to get it right. But it is super helpful to get you out of a sticky situation.
That's great. So thank you to our producers. Lots of great questions, keeping the conversation rolling. Thank you to our panelists for sharing everything. Thanks for Andy for putting this stuff together and answering all your questions there. So really, really great work. Another good Thursday. I think these are one of my the most fun mornings is kind of digging through what we're working on. I do think we're going to look back at this and just go, this is where it all began. It's an interesting thing that's happening here. So, all right. Tomorrow we have Parsec, so make sure to come in, do some research, do some questions. We want to make sure that we have lots of stuff. I don't know Parsec as well, so I'm really going to lean on you guys to be asking all the questions. So stay tuned for that, and remember that we have labs 2:00 Pacific Standard Time on today and tomorrow, and we're really digging into some stuff. So I try to get there if you can. All right, into after hours we go.